Hello, everyone. I'm glad to have you back for this course. You are engaged in our initial discussion right now. We see that there's a lot of participation in the discussion. That's good. That's as initial ice-breaking assignment. It helps you get to know one another. It gets you know, it just shares some of your background about the subject matter. But really, the hope is to so you can start the practice of dialogue. I don't know if you saw my message about the value of dialogue in your Blackboard messages, but we want to give you we won't just want to preach the value of dialogue. We want to give you the opportunity to practice it with these discussion questions to get you going and talking to one another even now in this course. Now, having started that, we want to start, Dr. Haq and I want to start talking about now the background of these two religions, how they originated, what are their, how they formed, how their sacred scriptures come together. And then over time, you'll start seeing some of the similarities, differences, but some of the similarities and the overlap as well. So first things first, let me talk about, and then Dr. Haq and I will both have subject matters we're going to be discussing. And I'll share the screen as we go through particular materials, and we'll go back and forth talking about specific areas where we have a little bit more background, a little bit more history and expertise. So first things first, let me share my screen here, talking about the basic facts of Christianity. Now, Christianity began as basically a Jewish heresy. According to Christianity's internal chronology and internal claims, it began when a Jewish rabbi in the first century Palestine began preaching locally something that he considered to be a fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. And at the time of the first century in Palestine, there was the only holy scriptures that they had would have been the Jewish Bible or the Hebrew Bible at the time, which there's a great deal of background to explain how the Jewish Bible was contained and collected. But basically, it's the Hebrew Bible at the time of Jesus' time in the first century of Palestine would have been what we in the Christian world now refer to as the Old Testament, which is the 39 books from Genesis to Malachi. In the Christian tradition, they refer to the Older Testament as Hebrew Bible, and then the New Testament as everything that has been written since Jesus' ministry, and basically it was written by his followers. But according to all those internal claims, Christianity starts with Jesus of Nazareth in the ministry in the first century Palestine. And basically it gets the name Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth gets the name Christ or Christos, or it gives a translation through Latin and German from the Hebrew word Messiah, which means anointed one, someone special, someone out of the ordinary, or empowered to fulfill specific prophecies. And there's actual exterior sources that can confirm that there was a historic figure named Jesus of Nazareth, Josephus, the early Roman historian, who spoke of Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified by the Romans in the first century. Now, the Christian tradition claims that after Jesus was crucified, Christian tradition claims that he rose again, or his resurrection occurred on the third day of that event. So if you consider it being one event, Friday being the crucifixion, and then Saturday and Sunday, the third day of that event, the claim is that he came back to life, that he didn't swoon, that he didn't just pass out from the pain, but that he was dead, and that he came back to life and walked out of the tomb. That's called the resurrection. Well, with that event starts Christianity, and it starts as basically a Jewish heresy because it was Jewish in origin, but with a new teaching added on, centered around this following of this person. As a result, there was a controversy at the time as to whether this was a new Jewish sect, and how long did it break apart? How long did it take for it to break away from Judaism and become primarily a non-Jewish type of religion? There's some debate as to how long that took, but eventually that Christianity kind of left just merely the Jewish world and became primarily a non-Jewish religion as it expanded westward across the Roman Empire. The type of religion is that it's monotheistic, and monotheism comes from two Greek words: mono meaning one, and theist or theism coming from the Greek word theos, which means God. So if it's something if someone is a theist, they believe in God. They believe in God. If they're a monotheist, they believe there is one God. And so Christianity says it's monotheistic. And then some have the hard time wrapping their minds around that, because later on we'll talk about the Christian belief in the Trinity. Is the Trinity a belief in three gods, or is it, what is that? And so, but nevertheless, Christian claims are that how the definition of God or describing the nature of God is complex, but ultimately they believe in one God. And they consider themselves to be an Abrahamic religion, meaning that in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, there's the narrative of Abraham, who was basically a Bedouin who had migrated across the Fertile Crescent from what would be modern day Iraq into the area of Palestine, and became blessed and with great wealth, and had a progeny that would eventually expand and grow. And Abraham, starting with the name Abram, goes through a process whereby in Genesis his name gets changed to Abraham. And in the story of Genesis, there's this divine blessing on Abraham, whereby his children and grandchildren and so forth will eventually grow and expand, and God will bless the world through him. Well, that Abrahamic tradition winds up having a lot of different ancestors that go in many different geographic directions. As a result, there are more than, even though Judaism considers itself to be an Abrahamic tradition, because it grew, that his progeny grew and expanded to be the Israelites, or the Jewish tradition. Well, he also had many children as well, and then the Genesis narrative, it describes having a child of Ishmael as well, which also is an Abrahamic tradition. And Dr. Haq will talk a little bit more about that later on, and we'll talk about the narrative associated with that. But ultimately, because Judaism is an Abrahamic religion or tradition, and Christianity is ultimately a Jewish tradition, Christianity claims to be an Abrahamic tradition also. Now, the country of origin, it begins in first century Palestine or Judah, or it's a Eastern Mediterranean origin. And it's the largest religion on earth, about 2.2 billion adherents, closely associated with, there are many that are closely associated with modernism and globalization. That's the Western calendar. But we have to remember that that's basically in the West. When you think about Roman Catholicism or the Protestant traditions, as in the American or the North American or even European Christian tradition, that's one part of it. There's an entirely other aspect of Christianity that oftentimes gets forgotten by the West, and that's the Orthodox, the Eastern or ethnic Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Latvian, Serbian, Russian Orthodox, even the Coptic Church, which is basically Egyptian Orthodox. So there's a lot of Christians that have nothing to do with Western modernism and globalization. And so that's those adherents, that number of adherents, when we talk about 2.2 billion, oftentimes that number can actually be somewhat conservative because we're just thinking about the Western tradition. But that's getting into the weeds a little bit. Let's move on. It has a sacred text, and that's the Holy Bible. And it's a collection of books organized in Hebrew, Old Testament, and the Christian New Testament. And basically, the Protestant Bible has 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, and 27 in the New Testament. And in 66 books written in 3 languages, Hebrew and Aramaic, and then Greek. In the New Testament is primarily written in Greek. And these biblical canons differ based upon the Protestant canon is about 66 books. The Catholic and Orthodox traditions are a little bit longer because they have other books that over time that they've considered to be part of the Bible, whereas the Protestant tradition in the 16th century in Europe disagreed as to whether or not some of those books should have been part of the Bible. And that part of that internal argument is part of what constitutes that religion history of those internal debates of what constitutes, should this be in the scriptures or not? Is it seen to us that has been written by God? Is it authoritative? Does it have all the hallmarks of authoritative writings of God? That debate, was, considerable for some time. And then part of what the result of that debate was the split from the Roman Catholic tradition and the Protestant tradition of Europe. But anyway, nevertheless, those 66 books that the Protestant canon has, though the longer canon all has those as well, and that constitutes the core of Christian teaching. Very few teachings in either the Roman Catholic or Orthodox traditions are reliant upon those books that are in dispute. They just consider them to be valuable. Some of the main terms that the Christian tradition maintains are things like original sin, kingdom of God, the Trinity. Catholic is a phrase that's oftentimes misunderstood, because Catholic here, this comes from two Greek words, kata, which means according to, and holos, which means the whole. So the word kata and holos, according to the whole, that's basically anything that's considered, that any Christian that believes according to all of Christianity is typically considered Catholic in nature. In fact, for the first 1,000 years, the church considered itself to be Catholic, meaning it believed all in one way, according to the whole. Later on, after the great East-West split, the Orthodox away from the Roman Catholics, the Roman Catholic Church started calling themselves Catholic to differentiate themselves from, say, the Orthodox. But nevertheless, some of these terms really require more definition. If someone's Catholic, that means in the medieval abuses of the Catholic Church, there are some Christians that protested against that and wanted to reject some of those abuses of the organized Catholic Church. And they, in protesting those abuses, came to be known as Protestant. And so that's most of what you see in North America today is in some way Protestant in the American Christian tradition, and in some parts of Europe as well. And of course, the Orthodox or Eastern version of Christianity, Greece, Russia, or even the Coptics of Egypt. The Trinity is one of the biggest challenges, and this is an area where good dialogue occurs between in the Christian and Muslim traditions, because that the Trinity is the way in which the Christians believe that the Bible describes God as being three distinct persons, yet one God. And this is something that logically seems improbable or possibly even impossible. Nevertheless, Christian teaching has been defined since the 3rd century, that the scriptures teach that this enigma of three distinct persons being equal and operating as one God. And this is what they refer to as the Trinity. And through this understanding of the Trinity, the person of Jesus Christ is elevated to equality with the others that are the Father, and the Spirit. So that's an area where oftentimes in Christian tradition, early on, it was difficult for people to wrap their mind around how can the Jesus Christ being the Son, how can it both be equal to God and yet not, and God, Father is God, and yet the Son is God and the Spirit is God, and yet somehow these three are equal, yet not the same. And that's something that's very difficult for many people. Most Christians don't even understand it, yet they're asked to affirm it and believe it anyway. Now, these are terms that we'll get into more later on in the course, but these are things that are somewhat distinct to the Christian tradition and how they define them. Some of their major holidays are like Advent, which is a preparatory season leading up to Christmas. And most people have heard of Christmas in the Western world, celebrating the birth of Jesus. And many people will say, well, I don't know if he was necessarily born on December 25th. That's irrelevant. Basically, however, the date is a designated date to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, followed by times of Lent, which is a time of penitence and preparation leading up to Easter, which is the high point of the Christian calendar because it celebrates the resurrection, the death and resurrection of Jesus. All of Christian tradition and all of Christian theology is dependent upon the idea that Jesus rose from the dead. If that's actually not believed, everything else falls apart. So that winds up being what's referred to sometimes as the crux myth, meaning that in all of the myths that are happening in a religion, typically oftentimes it will have a crux myth that upon which all other myths within that religion will depend. So religions will have introductory myths or origin myths. They will have redemption and myths and historical myths of different types. And when I use the term myth, I don't mean that it didn't happen. I'm saying that it's a story that's elevated to that level of importance. Well, in all of those, many religions will have a crux myth. If this didn't happen, everything else really loses its importance. And so for Judaism, the crux myth is the Exodus, the deliverance from Egypt by God through the punishment of 10 plagues upon the kingdom of Egypt at the time. That's the crux myth of Judaism. Everything else is dependent upon it. Without that, it all falls apart. And the same thing is true for Christianity. It has a crux myth. And the resurrection of Christ is the crux myth of Christianity. Without that, there is no need for Christmas or Lent or Pentecost or anything else like that. So these are some of the basic facts about Christianity. We'll be talking more about each of these as we go forward. Right now, Dr. Haq, would you lead us through these facts about Islam?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ott, for your briefing on the basics of the Christianity. And I was listening to it. And I was just wondering, thinking about it, I thought that we ask you a question that, as you mentioned, that Trinity is kind of one of the challenges to explain the faith of the Christianity. And as you mentioned, many Christians don't properly understand it.
Sure.
Is there any group, or there has been currently or historically any Christian denomination or group or sect that they had different views about this with compared to the mainstream concept of Trinity?
Absolutely. In fact, that's actually a great segue to a subsequent talk we're going to give pretty soon about some of the history of both the religions. Early on in Christianity, it is believed that this idea of the Trinity was the normative belief. But oftentimes I say that in one of the definitions of culture I often give students is that culture is those things that everyone knows so much that no one has to say. And so, if you understand something so much in a culture, you don't even have to explain it, that's culture. Right. Same thing is true in religious culture. Religious cultures have a set of assumptions that are so clear that no one has to explain it, unless someone challenges it. Then it requires new definition to kind of like, no, this is what we mean. Well, this was what happened with Christianity in the 4th century. And that is that in the 4th century, Arius, a Christian bishop that was in Antioch, was actually decided that our thoughts about the Trinity, in his mind, he could not reconcile that Christianity both taught the Trinity and was monotheistic at the same time. And so the way Arius sought to reconcile that was to claim that the Father is greater than the Son and the Son greater than the Spirit, but that they cannot be equal and yet one God at the same time. So in his mind, the Father must be God, and the Son something created that the Father created is some sort of intermediary between us and him. Well, that's so great a disagreement, so great a debate and a tumult arose over that it actually had geopolitical ramifications for the Roman Emperor Constantine. And so Constantine called all the bishops of the Christian world at the time to a place called Nicaea, which is in modern day Turkey, asking them to solve this problem. What does the Bible teach? And you must be in one mind about this. I don't want my kingdom ripped apart by it. And so the Council of Nicaea met in 325 to determine that whether or not we find it comprehensible, the scriptures teach this doctrine of the Trinity. And that is that the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Spirit is God. Even if the Father is not the Son or the Spirit, the Son is not the Father or the Spirit, and the Spirit is not the Father or the Son, yet these three are one. Again, seemingly incomprehensible, yet they agreed that this is what the scriptures teach. And Arianism was condemned at the time as being not Christian. So ever since then, the doctrine of the Trinity has been a central doctrine to Christianity. And anything that is not Trinitarian has been considered not Christian.
I
So,
see.
I don't know if that helps.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Okay. Dear students, let's go over a brief introduction to the basic Islamic facts. And the main deity or the God which is believed in Islam is Allah. Allah is the Arabic name of God and the supreme power, and the Allah is the God in Arabic, while in different languages they have different names of God. Like in English he's called God, and in Hinduism or in their language it's called Brahma, or El in Hebrew or among the Jews. So in Arabic language the name of the God is Allah. Now I would like to clarify over here is that Allah is not the God of Islam. Allah is the name of God in Arabic. And since the Islamic scriptures are in Arabic, that's why Allah is used by every Muslim. But the Arabic speaking Christians, they have their Bible in Arabic language. There are a good number of Christians living in Lebanon, in the Middle East and other countries, and their Bible is called Al-Kitab al-Muqaddas in Arabic language. And the name of God in Arabic Bible is Allah, the same like what is in the Quran. So that tells us that Allah is not God of Islam and God is the God of Christianity, but these are the differences in the languages. But the names of God in whether it is a Christian God or it is an Islamic, it is same. Now, the word Islam comes from two root words. One is the peace, and the other one is submission. And a Muslim is the one who submits his or her will to the will of God, to the will of Allah. And so Islam is the name of the religion. Literal meanings is submission or peace, but terminologically, the religion of Islam is called what Prophet Muhammad preached, who starting from 610. Prophet Muhammad was born in 570, and when he was 40 years old, he received the divine revelation through the archangel Gabriel, and that's from 610 to 632. These were the 22 and a half years that the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad. And since then, whatever he preached, including the teachings of the Quran and his personal explanation of the Quran, this religion is called Islam. And those that they follow Prophet Muhammad and they believe in the Quran and the religion of Islam, these people are called Muslims. And Muhammad is a human being. He is a creation of God. He was like other human being. He was born from his after the marriage of his parents, and he grew up in Mecca, and he is not worshipped. He is not an angel. He is a human being, but he is a special human being who has been selected by God to receive the divine revelation. So just to make it clear that in the religion of Islam, Muhammad is not worshipped, but he is a messenger who got the divine message and conveyed it to the people. And that was his job or his role. And then whatever message he received from God and he conveyed it to the people, he practically practiced himself and demonstrated. And he became a teacher of that message. So that is his status, that when we understand Quran, we understand it according to the practical demonstration of Prophet Muhammad. And that's where the word sunnah is coming. Sunnah means the actions, sayings, advice, and other explanations that the Prophet Muhammad did in order to explain the religion of Islam. The origin of Islamic traditions in the Quran, it is claimed that the Quran claims that the message in the Quran, which was brought by Prophet Muhammad, is not a new message. It is the continuity of the same traditional message that has been there in the previous scriptures and the previous prophets. So the Islamic scriptures, Quran and the Sunnah, both recognize the previous scriptures. Almost all the prophets of Old Testament and the including Jesus, they are considered to be the prophets of God, and Gospels and Torah and the book of Sam, which is called Zabur in the Quran, they are all recognized as the divine messages of God that were sent to the people, just like Quran, by their respective prophets before Prophet Muhammad. Now, the Quran is the updated divine scripture, and which has replaced the previous scriptures, like when the Moses brought the Torah, and when Jesus came, he updated it with the Gospels, and then the Prophet Muhammad came, who updated it with the Quran. So that is how the Islam is related with the previous traditions and the scriptures and the religions. And since Prophet Muhammad was from the progeny of the Ishmael, who was the other son of Abraham, and Jesus and Moses and others, they were from the progeny of the Isaac, who is the other son of Abraham. So in this way, Prophet Muhammad and Jesus and Moses, they were cousins. So we can consider that Islam and Christianity or Judaism are cousins and their followers. So because they go back to the same Abrahamic traditions. And Prophet Abraham is considered as a forefather of all the prophets in the Quran. But amazingly, there is a verse in the Quran in which Allah, God, is commanding Prophet Muhammad that he should follow the footsteps of Prophet Abraham. So that is a real good connection with the Prophet Abraham, and Prophet Abraham becomes the main figure which is respected and believes both in Christianity, in Judaism, and in Islam. Okay, now the type of the religion, Islam is obviously a monotheistic religion, and its unity of God concept is very clear, and it's not there is no discussion like in the Christianity. There is a discussion about the Trinity, but in Islam it's simple and it's straight, that there is only one God, and he has no family, no son, daughters, wife, or anybody, and everybody else is his creation, including Prophet Muhammad and other prophets. And he has created angels, and he has created jinns, and he has created all this creation. But there are only two existences in this universe. One is the existence of God, which is existing by himself, and then all other creation of God, which is existing not by itself, but because of the existence of God. Okay. So these are the two existences, and that's what is the monotheistic aspect. And as I mentioned, the Abrahamic faiths continued, and Prophet Muhammad, who was raised in Mecca, and he became prophet in Mecca, then he lived 13 years in which he faced persecution, torture, and opposition by the Meccans because they were involved in polytheism. They used to worship a lot of gods, and the Prophet Muhammad was preaching then the unity, the oneness of God, the monotheism of the Islam, and they didn't like it. So they eventually Prophet Muhammad and all the followers, his believers with him, they have to migrate to save their life from Mecca to Medina. So the rest of the 10 years of the Prophet Muhammad's life is spent in Medina, where he passed away in 632, and that's where he is buried. And the Mecca and the Medina both considered the sacred cities for the Islam, and the pilgrimage is done to the city of Mecca, where there is a house of Allah, which is of course symbolic, but it's a black square kind of building, which you can see here on the picture, and all around it are the people. Actually, people from Muslims from all over the world, when they pray their 5 times daily prayer, they are supposed to face this black square building. And this is just to create uniformity among the Muslims all over the world. Other than that, God is everywhere. Quran says that in every direction God is, but this is just a symbolic.
Is this what's referred to as the Kaaba?
Yes, that's what is called Kaaba.
Okay, thank you.
And that's as next, the special features about Islam, we can say that it is one of the second largest religion, 1.9 billion Muslims in the world. And it's a preaching religion, which means that people can convert into Islam, and they can become Muslim from any ethnicity, race, color, geographical or regional origin. And currently Muslims have about 50 countries in which majority of the people are Muslims. And normally people think that every Muslim is Arabic speaking, but Arabic speaking Muslims are only 20%, that they live in the Middle East or in North Africa. But the rest of the Muslim world, which they have their own languages according to where they live. Turkey and India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Indonesia and Malaysia and the Central Asian states like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and all those areas, and some of the African countries, they speak their own languages. So this is how the Muslim world is scattered, and it includes all the cultures, all the races, all the colors. Okay. And next, the sacred text of Islam is Quran and the Sunnah, as we already mentioned. And the Quran is considered the word of God, speech of God, not the creation of God. So this is kind of an attribute of God. And that's why it cannot be altered or changed by any scholar or human being or by any prophet, because it's not something created. It is a characteristic of God, which is there with the God. And the Sunnah are the practical and the verbal directions given by the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. Some of the popular terminology about Islam is the mosque or the masjid, which is the worship place where Muslims get together for their congregational prayers and for the Friday service. Weekly service in Islamic religion is on Friday noon, like the Christians' weekly service is Sunday and the Jewish weekly service is on Saturday, and the Muslims are Islamic religious services is on Friday at noon. Many of the Muslim countries have off on Friday. That it's just like their weekly holiday.
What is the origins? I'm sorry to interrupt. Why Friday?
Well, in the Quran, there is a chapter, it's called Friday.
Okay.
And there is a commandment that throughout the week, Muslims pray 5 times. But on Friday, the noon prayer is shortened half, and the half of it is converted into a sermon.
Okay.
And so Friday, people cannot pray that noon prayer individually. 5 times daily prayer, you don't have to be in the masjid or mosque. You can pray individually at your home, at your work, at the airport, but not Friday prayer.
Okay.
Friday prayer has to be in a gathering, and there has to be a sermon, which means a message needs to be given.
Okay.
So that's why the Friday prayer is considered obligatory for Muslims, except that if there is an exception, if somebody is traveling or sick or other excuses.
I ask because, I mean, obviously the Jewish tradition worships on Saturday because it's the Sabbath. It's the last day of the week. And so they have that, or they have that tradition coming from the story of Exodus, the 10 Commandments that says, keep the Sabbath day holy. On 6 days you do your labor, then on the last day, you're not to do any work. And so that's their Sabbath, their day. And then for Christians, it's Sunday because it originally was Saturday. It began. It originally Christianity began as a Jewish sect, but over time it changed for Christians, changed to Sunday because that commemorates supposedly the day that Jesus rose from the grave. So Sunday commemorates the resurrection. For Jews, it is a Sabbath, and so I never heard why Muslims gather on Friday. So I wanted to know what the origin of that was.
Well, there are some traditions in which they're saying that the Sabbath originally used to be on Friday and then it got changed to Saturday. I mean, some of the traditions are like that, which I'm not sure how authentic or where they are coming from, but there are some traditions like that.
Well, and when you study religions, I mean, all religions have these elements, what I call these elements of the sacred. There's sacred time, sacred rites, sacred space, sacred offices, sacred objects, and sacred myths or stories. And so whenever they have their sacred times, typically there's a sacred story associated with why they have the sacred time at when they do. And so Christians and Jews and Muslims, they will have a story to explain why they have their sacred times that they do. Like, for example, when you come into the holidays, each of these are sacred times for Islam, and each of them are going to have a story as to why that's a sacred time. And I was curious about the days of worship and so on.
Well, most of the Islamic holidays and sacred timings and places have got, you are right, they have got a meaning behind it.
Right.
Which means there is a certain purpose or certain message behind it. So Friday is, and most of these holidays or sacred timings and places, they are, their origin is coming from the Quran or from the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
So anything which is not in the Quran or is not proved to be authentic traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, then that any historical story or something, that's not considered like valid. And it's not considered like to be real reason. So for example, why we Friday? Because the Quran says that you have to be there on Friday, right? And there has to be a message. So why this holidays, there are Eid al-Fitr and then Eid al-Adha. Eid al-Fitr is at the end of the month of Ramadan, the fasting month, and Eid al-Adha is the end of the annual pilgrimage or Hajj, which is performed in the city of Mecca in Arabia. And that is, both of these are there in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and they have been given commandments in the Quran. Now, one thing which is done on Eid al-Adha, the second holiday, is it's the holiday of sacrifice. The Prophet Abraham's sacrifice, that he was ready to sacrifice his son by the order of God, but God, just when God was testing him and when he was ready, God said that you have proved yourself true. No, you don't have to kill your son, but you have to kill, he killed a lamb or a sheep. Now, to remember this big sacrifice of Prophet Abraham, every year, Muslims all over the world, they sacrifice an animal.
I see. And
that is called the festival of Prophet Abraham. And goat and sheep is done by one person, and 7 people get together, they put their share in a cow or in a camel. And this is how they do. And part of this meat is given to the poor and the needy people, or the homeless and the hungry people.
I see.
All over the Muslim world. But in United States, in the big cities like Houston, Chicago, New York, there are arrangements done, and the meat is provided in the homeless and hungry areas, where they are, some places they cook the meat and then they give, and the other places they just invite them over the food.
I see.
So that is one of the traditions that is coming since the time of the Prophet Muhammad.
Could you speak about the 5 pillars?
Yeah, 5 pillars are basically the practical aspects of the Islamic worships. And the first pillar is the declaration of the Shahada, which means how you declare your faith. Yes, I am a Muslim. And what makes a person Muslim? Only 2 things. If a person believes there is no one to be worshipped except one God, and secondly, that Prophet Muhammad is the true messenger of God. Anybody on earth, if he believes that, is technically a Muslim.
Okay.
And the rest of the pillars are 5 daily prayers, which has certain timings. Every prayer has to be performed at a certain window of time. And if that window is passed, then that prayer is missed or skipped, which is, if done intentionally, is a sin.
Okay.
And then there is a makeup for that sin, but he loses the original reward. The second pillar is the fasting in the month of Ramadan, which means from the daybreak early, like about 1.5 hours before sunrise until sunset, no eating, no drinking, no intimate relations.
Okay.
And one has to watch what he or she is saying, like telling lies, backbiting, that can damage the fasting.
Okay.
So that is done for 1 month, which is a lunar month. Sometimes it's 29 days, sometimes 30 days, according to the sun, according to the moon, the new moon. And this, at the end of this, there is a celebration which is called Eid al-Fitr. Now, the fourth one is the annual charity, which is called zakat. That means that every Muslim, after 1 year, have to pay 2.5% of his or her assets to the poor and the needy people of the community. And this amount is more in the Shia community sector. You know, there are about 10 to 15% are Shias, and their annual charity is 5%. And this 2.5% assets, like, it's not income that you get. It's besides your monthly expenses and income, whatever you have on the side as your saving or as your assets, like you have an extra property, or you're making money of that, or you have an extra house that you have rented on, or you have saving in your bank account, like you have $5,000, $10,000 there. So 2.5% of your assets has to be given to the poor people, and that is zakat. The more a person's saving is, the 2.5% will be more. So this is a circulation of money, which does not just rich people are holding and becoming rich and rich, but this is circulation of money which is moving in the community to the all kinds of the people. And then finally, it is the Hajj. It's an annual pilgrimage to the city of Mecca. A person has to travel all the way to the Mecca in order to perform Hajj on a certain days of the year, not any time. And this is obligatory if a person can afford only once a lifetime. But people who can afford can go as many times in their life as they like. Jihad is one of the most misunderstood concept of the jihad.
Right.
This jihad is basically an institution in Islam which makes a Muslim active you have to struggle, work hard, and don't be lazy. Don't sit down, complete your tasks on time, be ahead of your schedules. That is the main spirit of the jihad. But fighting for the good cause is also part of the jihad. And especially if there is an enemy showing aggression or attack, to defend is also called jihad. Unfortunately, only that aspect of jihad is known. The other aspect of the jihad is not understood by many people, or particularly by the media. The opposite, Dr. Ott, it's very interesting that the opposite of the jihad in the Quran is sitting idly.
Well, it's really interesting because as I listen to commentators about the state of Christianity, and they speak of Christianity as its rise and decline in the West, one of the critiques that Western Christianity, and I can't speak for other culture, Christianity in other cultures, but one of the critiques of Western Christianity has been that it actually asks so little of you. I remember during the first Gulf War, this is back in the early 90s, there were articles that were news articles that were created as to why so many American U.S. soldiers that had engaged in the liberation of Kuwait during the Operation Desert Storm, who were there to liberate Kuwait from the forces of Iraq, and how many U.S. American soldiers had been raised Christian and were converting to Islam there. And the news article gave many explanations for this, but probably one of the primary reasons it gave, and this is 30 years ago, one of the primary reasons it gave was structure. That it actually asked of them some type of struggle, that they were attracted to the discipline of it, and that even though they had been raised Christian as Western Christians themselves, they found that it asked nothing of them. And being soldiers themselves, they were used to a structured life. They were used to having some sort of personal discipline. And to find a religion that asked something of them was actually very attractive.
Well, you are right. Islam by itself, even for the civilians, it's a very disciplined life. Mm. You have to wake up and you have to pray your morning prayer before sunrise. And if you miss that, that is considered a sin. And the night prayer is like 1.5 hours after the sunset. And in the daytime, you have to wash yourself 5 times in order to pray 5 times. So a lot of hygienic, punctuality, and other things are involved in an Islamic practical life. It's not that easy, but at the same time, it makes you more disciplined and organized.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. The calendar, Islamic rituals are performed according to the lunar calendar, like 5 times, like Ramadan fasting and Hajj and charity, zakat, all is done according to the lunar calendar. But 5 times daily prayers are done according to the according to the solar timings, like sunrise, sunset, noon. This is how the 5 times daily prayer timings are set. So the movement of the sun and the moon both are considered in the religious practices of Islam. Muslim population is about 1.5, 1.9 billion in the world, and majority of the Muslims are Sunnis, 15% Shias, 20% Arabic speaking. That is how pretty much 7 to 10 million Muslims in North America. Well, I think it's an old figure, because 7 million was when President Barack Obama took over the presidency. At that time, he mentioned that Muslims were 7%, and that was, I guess, in 2009. So it has been about 10, 12 years. Now the number must have gone more than 10 million.
Right.
Because the Muslims are growing in 3 ways in North America: migration from other countries, and then conversion, and then the growing of the families. Usually Muslims have got more children than others, so That's one of the things that we guess they might have become more in number.
Right.
But anyway, the beliefs of Islam's are 6 articles of the faith, in which believe in one Allah, believe in all his prophets, believe in all his books. Books mean scriptures like Torah, Gospel, others.
Right.
And all the prophets mean Jesus is a prophet in Islam. And Musa is a prophet, Abraham is a prophet, Noah is a prophet, Adam is a prophet. So according to some traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, there has been 124,000 prophets in the history. And according to one verse of the Quran, there is no nation that God never sent a prophet in the history to them. So that's how the Muslims don't know all the prophets, but they have to believe in all the prophets. And then angels, all the angels, we don't know how many they are, but we believe that there are angels of God, that they are existing, deputed on different duties.
Right.
And there are 5 most high-ranking prophets among all these prophets, and they are Prophet Abraham, Prophet Noah, Prophet Moses, Prophet Jesus, and Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon all of them. Now, similarities with the Christian beliefs, there are beliefs that similar, like Christianity, in whatever form they have, at least they claim that there is unity of God, oneness of God. So that is first thing. And besides that, the believing in the prophets, books, scriptures, this is a similarity. Jesus is another similarity. The miraculous birth of Jesus has been mentioned in the Quran, that he was born without father. Then the Quran says that Jesus spoke in infancy. And then there are miracles of Jesus, like he used to make dead people alive. He used to make blind people seeing. He used to cure the people with leprosy, their disease. And that Jesus used to make birds with the mud, and then he used to blow, and this bird will start flying. So these are the miracles of Jesus mentioned in the Quran. Right. And but the Quran denies that Jesus was not crucified on the cross. Right. Yes, they tried, the Jews and the Roman soldiers, but God saved him. That's what the Quran says. And so the crucifixion, since is not there, so his resurrection is also not there. And he was lifted upward alive, and he is there, and he will come back before the end of this world, before the day of judgment. That is some of the common beliefs of the Christians with the Jews. Differences is that, as I mentioned, Trinity, there is no concept of Trinity, crucifixion, or the divinity, or the sonship of Jesus. These are the differences, or the contrast with the Christian theology. Right. But overall, the moral, ethical aspects, eschatology, these are all similarities between Christianity and Islam.
Right. Well, and probably one of the primary, I would say I'll stop sharing this screen just for a moment, just to kind of give people a variety of things to look at. Probably the greatest overlap that Christianity has with Islam is, it's the most basic thing, it's monotheism. Because
is what?
Monotheism.
Monotheism, because morality and ethics.
Well, anthropologically, we could argue that there's morality and ethics distributed across many different cultures, but monotheism is the revolutionary idea. In my study of, say, religions of ancient Mexico, they're highly polytheistic. There's multiple gods of different types, and yet they still have pretty well-developed moral codes with ethical practices, and yet, hundreds of gods. So monotheism is the revolutionary idea that links, I think, links Islam and Christianity, because there's 3 different categories. There's monotheism. There's what's referred to as henotheism, which is multiple gods, but you worship the best one. There's a great one, even though there's multiple gods. An example of henotheism might have been, the closest thing to that might have been ancient Egypt, where where Amun was the sun god, the highest one, but they have multiple gods. That's henotheism. And then polytheism, where just many gods that are all on an equal plane, and they argue and they fight, and they seem to have all the same characteristics, problems that humans have. But monotheism, the idea that there's one God and there is no other, is revolutionary, really. And it's not terribly common throughout the history of the world. Most cultures are either going to be either henotheistic or polytheistic. And this idea of monotheism really is oftentimes, like you said, even in as Muhammad preaches monotheism in his arena, that's going to have geopolitical problems associated with it too, because that's going to, the more people convert to monotheism, that does away with the polytheism industries that grow up around the selling of idols, the various different trade that takes place, or
economy related with that.
Yeah, right. Everything associated with that. And so that's going to be unpopular in some ways too. So monotheism is revolutionary in that it's not naturally occurring throughout the world. Most cultures are polytheistic, and usually they have many gods that are associated with natural phenomena, the wind, the sky, the earth, death, things like this. And so monotheism is unique, and it's reliant upon this idea of revelation. Like people didn't discover the one God by themselves. That one God had to reveal themselves.
Right.
In fact, I gave the students a message in the Blackboard message on the value of dialogue. I have a little thing in there when I talk about the idea of revelation, that Islam and Christianity are all predicated on this idea of God had to reveal themselves. That humanity didn't discover God had to reveal themselves, and then take on that revelation, takes the form of our scriptures, the sacred scriptures. And so those
the Quranic criteria of monotheism is kind of a little bit more higher than the Christianity.
Right.
That's why the Trinity is questioned in the Quran, because it's hurting the monotheism.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult to wrap our minds around. I mean, that's why in the 4th century, Arius would find that would create that the Arian controversy would necessitate the Nicene Creed, basically, which is further down in our handout. We don't have time to go into that right now, but in our handout that we just saw, there's the Apostles' Creed, and then the different creeds of the Christian Church, the Nicene Creed.
So you think there was any impact on the Nicene Creed from the ancient Roman traditions?
Well, the Nicene Creed was necessitated by the Roman Emperor so as to bring peace out of the theological debate, the theological.
You mean the political necessity?
Political necessity, yes.
Okay.
I mean, there are some who try to think of Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, as somehow a devout Christian. I try to be a little bit more realistic. At the time, by the time Constantine had instituted religious, when Constantine instituted religious liberty across the empire, the Christian church, had expanded considerably, and so much of the Roman Empire in that beginning of the 3rd century had become Christian. As a result, if churches are starting to fracture and pull apart because of differing beliefs about the nature of the Trinity, that's going to have political ramifications for him, whether or not it's going to create political unrest in his kingdom. So so Constantine, he calls all the bishops to the Council of Nicaea, where they must decide once and for all, what do you say that these scriptures believe? In fact, Christian tradition has it. This isn't confirmed from outside sources, but Christian tradition has it that Constantine stepped off his throne and that placed a copy of the scriptures on the throne, saying this will be the authority by which you must decide this. And so, the problem is that we know that Jesus didn't write anything. The Gospels are not the writings of Jesus. All of the New Testament are the writings of the apostles about Jesus, and so therefore all of the writings are taken on equal value. Christians don't value the Gospels more than the rest of the writings of the New Testament. They see them all of equal value because they're all written by Jesus' followers. And so all of those are taken together and saying taken as a body of literature to decide, okay, we know that there is one God, but how does the New Testament, how do the writings of Jesus' followers describe that one God? And their decision was, that the one God is described in this way, in what's referred to as the Trinity. But as a result, and we can get into this in a subsequent discussion later on, as a subsequent result, the Trinity is difficult to picture.
Right.
There's earlier, it winds up taking the form of a diagram, which I have a PowerPoint for, a diagram that shows how the Son is God, the Father is God, and the Spirit is God, but neither of them are each other, and yet they're all one God. And that's something that's difficult to that's so difficult to explain that usually when most preachers that try to explain it do so poorly that they actually wind up teaching heresy as a result, because it's difficult to explain. But the point is that Christianity is always firmly affirming both, that it's monotheistic, one God, and yet described as three persons operating in conjunction with one another that it's one God. But nevertheless, they do have this in common, that Christians vehemently deny the idea of three gods. They firmly deny the idea of polytheism and affirming one God. And that's, in both for Islam and Christianity, this idea of monotheism, that there is a metaphysical singularity out there that created everything, that holds everything together and is accountable to no one, least of all you. That's something that Western modern people really have a problem with. And in that regard, both Christianity and Islam have basically have a shared message to Western humans, the Western man. You're not the center of the universe.
Right.
That's basically a shared message that we have to both of us.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And I think that's for today.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to stop recording at this time, just a moment.